Welcome to the Annie Centre podcast. My name is Justin Kingdon.
And I'm Dr. Anne Chalfont. And today we'll be discussing empathy versus discipline.
One mother, one mission. To create a world where families thrive. Dr. Anne Chalfont, internationally acclaimed clinical psychologist, family therapist, author and mother of 4 children, brings you powerful and practical parenting techniques from her clinical and personal experience. Ladies and gentlemen, the doctor is in the house.
Now, on with the show. So, in today's topic, you want to discuss empathy versus discipline as parenting styles. Why?
Because it's doing my head in lately and I need a place to offload. So in all seriousness though, I think as a mother as well as a clinician, this issue comes up all the time. Mm-hmm. So as a clinician, my own patients and the families I work with are constantly asking me whether they should use empathy or whether they should discipline in a range of different scenarios with their kids or their teenagers.
So it's black and white.
Yeah, well, I think they see it as black and white, and therefore they ask the question from a place of trying to have a strategy to use, which is straightforward that they can follow. Parents are always wanting, any human being is wanting a simple approach that's practical and easy to implement, not one that's not murky and muddy, so that it's clear. Parents want to know that, when they do X, Y is going to happen with their child.
Right.
So, I think they ask from a black and white perspective because they want it to be straightforward.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, therefore, they expect it to be a black and white answer. So that's understandable. And then I think as a mother myself with 4 children, I'm often reflecting. Probably that's the danger of being a clinician and a mother at the same time. But I'm often reflecting and frankly probably overanalyzing my parenting style or skills.
Right.
And, often in hindsight, thinking about whether the way I approached, my own children was appropriate, logical, where the interaction was successful, whether our relationship is still well connected and formed, all those sorts of things, because I know they're very important things as a clinician. And so I want to make sure that I see that, develop within my parenting.
Okay.
As well.
So
it really has been on my mind a lot.
All right. So let's kind of start at the top of the funnel before we get too far into things, and let's understand a definition of what empathy is and what discipline is, because personally when I think of empathy, I sometimes think is it being sympathetic. So what is empathy?
Sure. So empathy is a little bit different to sympathy. Empathy is feeling with someone. Okay. So in my mind, one way that I think is helpful to imagine it is kind of putting yourself alongside, like next to someone. Literally, if you think of a child or an adolescent sitting on the couch alongside them, that's the sort of image I conjure up. And sort of an arm around them and really putting yourself in their perspective, seeing it from their perspective. So being alongside them. That's what empathy is, feeling with them.
Okay.
Yeah. And then there are different types of empathy. So you can be empathetic at a, thinking level or a cognitive level. So you can see something from another person's perspective without necessarily having your emotions engaged. And then there's emotional empathy, where you literally feel the same feelings as the other person at the same time as they're feeling them. For example, if your child is hurt or distressed, you actually feel hurt or distressed at the same time. Or a child, when they look at you and smile and giggle, you look back and laugh and giggle, and there's a moment that you share of sort of shared pleasure. Okay. So there's empathy, emotional empathy there. Or there's compassion, which is another type of empathy, where you can see from their perspective how they're feeling, but you try and make suggestions to help them move through the feeling to a point of resolution. So they're the different types of empathy.
Okay, so let's just recap those. So the 3 types of empathy.
Cognitive empathy, or thinking from another person's perspective.
Right, that's I can see it from your perspective, but I'm not really showing the emotion or sharing the emotion.
Correct.
Okay.
Then there's emotional empathy.
Number
which is
2.
where we actually feel the same emotion at the same time as the individual. And then there's compassion.
So compassion.
Which is seeing it from their perspective, but then trying to help that person through the emotion to a point of resolution.
Okay, so I think everyone listening can probably think of examples of each of those, personal examples.
For sure.
Okay.
And that's different to sympathy in that sympathy is usually a sort of step removed from that.
Okay.
So it's something that we experience more from a distance, whereas empathy, as I said, is sort of feeling with the other individual.
Okay,
Yeah.
excellent. Now, discipline. Let's define that.
Yeah, so I think that's probably the reason that this has been something I've really been obsessing over lately, to be honest, because I think discipline is misunderstood, and I think that's at least the conclusion that I've come to. When I read in this area and do my own research and listen to families that come to me, I think discipline has been misunderstood as negative discipline or negative consequences, like, ignoring kids and using time out or giving a punishment or setting limits.
So discipline's now just become pure negative
It's
connotation.
being viewed in that way, as in, to discipline a child, people typically think of discipline as a set of, consequences for behaviour. Whereas what discipline really is simply teaching children through shaping their behaviour. And yes, consequences may be a part of that, but consequences can be positive as well as negative.
Okay.
So you can have, children who learn, in fact, to engage in a particular behaviour, like being helpful around the house, because of the positive consequences they get from you, i.e., maybe it's praise or a reward or a hug, some form of affection that shows them that you really value the fact that they've, helped you empty the dishwasher.
Right.
And they might be more inclined to do it again next time. So discipline really means both. It means the delivery of positive and negative consequences, and the way we teach and shape or try and change behaviour or mould behaviour on the basis of the way we give consequences to children.
So it's a more nuanced approach to discipline. And so really is, we've looked at this topic, empathy versus discipline.
Yeah.
Would it be correct to say empathy and discipline as a parenting style?
I think the idea of, there are so many different parenting styles and definitely, again, looking, on Dr. Google and listening to families and all of the books and blogs and posts that are out there. Everyone's got their 5 cents worth on parenting these days. So it's really hard for parents to know which way to go. And I think that's another reason why I sometimes, as a mother, feel overwhelmed, because there's a lot of information out there. But in terms of parenting styles and empathy and discipline, yes, I think it is more correct to say that the two can go together. There are times where one should use probably empathy and that's enough. There are times when discipline on its own is more appropriate, in the sense of using positive or negative consequences to try and directly change behaviour. And then there is a time where both are important to be used at the same time, really. And I can give little scenarios or examples
because
of that.
So they're not necessarily then opposing forces.
No, and I think that's a problem for families who come to me. And I certainly think when I have been researching and thinking about this myself, maybe that's the reason why I've been personally struggling with it, is because in online and in the literature, they're portrayed now almost as opposing forces. That if you are empathetic, somehow you're going to be overly indulgent of your child, or so emotionally empathetic with them that you won't be able to see past that in order to make sensible decisions about how to adjust the child or help the child learn to adjust their own behaviour. For example, if your child is fearful, that you'll be so empathetic to the fact that they're fearful that you'll facilitate their avoidance of whatever they're fearful of. And we talked in the last episode about the importance of facing fears. So
right, so that's your helicopter parent.
Yes, that's exactly
example.
Right. Yeah.
So that's where that kind of that phrase is used, that the parent's intervention constantly whenever the child experiences some level of challenge or maybe catastrophe.
Yes.
So that's that. So it's almost getting a name in that way, and that's seen as being
yes,
bad.
it's being permissive, really. Empathy is sort of being mistaken for a permissive parenting style.
Okay, so the child can get away with anything.
or
Mummy and daddy will come and rescue them.
The child is seen as an equal to the parent, really.
Right. Which is a risk in and of itself.
It is, absolutely, and it's certainly not a way that I would view, parenting. I mean, it's clear we live in in the family structure. There is a hierarchy, and whether we like that or not, that's the way it exists. And that's not just for humans; that's for animals and all sorts of beings. That there's a hierarchy. There are parents as a unit in a family at the top, and then there are children, or a parent and a child, depending on the family situation. And it is appropriate to see those as different roles. We don't think that a 4-year-old should be in charge of making their own decisions and determinations. And frankly, it's probably not even appropriate for a 14 or even a 15-year-old to be doing the same. There is a role for parents to set rules and boundaries and guidelines for their children. So there is a hierarchy in place. And it's important to understand and enforce, I suppose, for want of a better description, that hierarchy.
So it's interesting you say that, because then that sense of enforcement then comes to this idea of the disciplined parent, which has this connotation of, say, the tiger mum or the whatever tiger dad or that kind of person that then becomes so strict that it ends up, you may have a child that's performing exceptionally well academically, but then suddenly pushes the parents away at a certain age because enough's enough. And then there can be other consequences to that as well that the child experiences. So what are your thoughts then around that discipline piece and what that means?
So again, I think in the research that I've been doing and in the families that come to me, and again in the sort of books and blogs that I read, discipline is misunderstood or probably misconstrued to mean negative consequences, and parents who are very then disciplinarian in their style, if you like, or really the word is authoritarian.
Right, so consequence. You do this.
Then it is about punishment and a more punitive approach that this will happen, and it will only be my way or the highway. When I say jump, you say how high.
Right.
That sort of an approach. And again, that really, if we take that in and of itself, whilst just as being empathetic has advantages, being a disciplinarian or being authoritarian potentially has some advantages too. You're trying to create some structure for kids, and you're trying to help them understand that there are boundaries and limits, and to show respect for those as they develop. So that's really important, that they're life skills that children and adolescents need. But again, if we think only in that framework or that style, there are definitely negative consequences, which are that children feel inhibited. They feel that they can't really get a word in edgewise, that they have no say whatsoever, that there's almost total sort of disrespect for them as another being in the family. We don't, unlike with sort of the permissive parenting style where they're seen as equal, in the disciplinarian style, where discipline's thought of in a negative way,
right,
children are really kind of viewed as, sort of there to be told and not to be heard.
Okay.
So that can be so restrictive that at some point children rebel against that. So the total opposite really of what those sorts of parents are trying to achieve. And the other negative consequence is things like low self-esteem. They feel worthless. They feel that they don't have a voice, and they feel helpless, really. So it can lead to things like anxiety and depression.
Right. Okay, so that's good. So now we've got the two almost two polar opposites of each other, of empathy and discipline.
Certainly the way they've been presented more over time has been to polarise them, I think.
Okay, yeah. Good explanation there. So let's now discuss, how do we end the polarisation of empathy and discipline, and how do we approach the empathy and discipline together so that parents can use both in a constructive way, or grandparents or caregivers, teachers, anyone, how can they use empathy and discipline in a constructive way in the home or in the workplace so that it helps improve the relationship or continue to develop the relationship, and also remain respectful of the adult and of the child at the same time. So what are some strategies in that space?
So I think the thing that I have come to realise from the hours, literally hours and hours that I have spent obsessing over my own children, how many, the eldest is nearly 10, so 10 years worth of hours obsessing over my parenting style, and as all good clinicians do, and looking at this from a clinical perspective as well as a practitioner, there are two important things I've come to understand. One is that they do go together, and we can, and I'll run through some scenarios now about how that can work. And the other is the value of time in parenting, which I think is actually in fact that's the most important thing. Having time as a parent, and I'll talk about that in a moment.
Okay, so let's do some scenarios, and then let's talk about time.
So when to use which one, and how can they sit together? So in a recent Facebook post, I gave a really quick description of this. So to extrapolate on that, when you have a situation where something has been expected. So, for example, let's think of a child who's expecting to go out
Go to a movie.
Particular outing.
Let's say they're expecting to go to a movie.
And for whatever reason, that plan changes, as it often does in families. Someone's sick, so you can't all go, so it's not fair for some to go and others to stay home. So the executive decision is made not to do it, or something like that. I mean, there could be so many reasons that plans change. Plans change all the time in families.
But in this circumstance...
But a child's expecting something like a movie, and the plan changes.
So now they're told by mum and dad,
disappointed.
I'm now going to stay at home, there's no movie, that's it.
Yeah. Or I can think of a scenario, actually, one that I like even better is one that happened tonight in our family. So setting the table, ask the child in question to set the table.
Number two,
who spent a lot of effort and time setting the table in a particular way with particular sized plates. And then what happened was we realised that the dinner that we produced was going to be larger than what the plate could hold. So could you please go and change the plates over? Well, the response, whether it's a movie or whether it's this particular instance that happened in our household, was pretty similar to what we'd expect, which is, why don't you understand that I've just spent a lot of time choosing these plates and you asked me to do it and I did it and now you want to change it? Or in the case of a movie, it would be something along the lines of, I thought we were going to a movie and now we're not. Why aren't we going? That really sucks. Or language to that effect, probably worse. Distress and frustration and probably a bit of anger, maybe a meltdown, depending on the child and their age, and all sorts of things.
Okay.
But it's one of great disappointment mixed with other emotions.
Okay.
And that plays out in their behaviour. So there's a change in plan and there is that distress. So in that situation, that's beyond the child's control or the teenager's control. It's not something that they choose to have change. Like in the dinner example, it was me who discovered really that the planned dinner wasn't going to be sufficient for what they had separately organised in terms of the plates.
Right.
So that's not their doing and it's out of their control. In the movie scenario, it's not the child's fault that another child may be sick, for instance, and the family has made the decision not to go. There's just simply been a change that's out of their control.
Okay.
So in that situation, it is very appropriate to be empathetic because we want to show that child that we can really put ourselves in their shoes. It's not of their doing. They haven't deliberately chosen to be peeved and to have a tantrum for no apparent reason. They were expecting one thing. Something else has happened instead. And for all intents and purposes, as far as they're concerned, that seems pretty unreasonable. And from a child or an adolescent's perspective, depending on what the scenario is, it may well be unreasonable. So we need to put ourselves in their shoes at that moment.
How do we do that? In that moment when, in this example, you're trying to get dinner out, right? The plates are wrong. In your adult mind, just change the plates. It's not that big a deal. It's just going from something smaller to bigger. You've just explained how it is actually a big deal in the child's mind. So with all the challenge going on, let's just use the dinner example for now. You've got dinner going. You're going to hit a deadline. You want dinner served so you can still get everyone to bed or other homework done at a good time. What's the practical approach in that circumstance with that child?
So the practical approach, and not to give myself too much of a pat on the back, but for once I feel like I did get it right.
Okay. Well.
And what I did do in this situation is what I think I would ask my own clients or patients to do. And that is, the practical approach would be to say, I can really see how you have spent a lot of time thinking this through tonight. You put a huge amount of effort into setting the table in the way that you thought would be lovely, choosing the right plates. You've even got the cutlery arranged beautifully. It's taken you some time and effort, and this was really important for you. So really showing the child, in this instance, my son, that I could understand that he had spent time and energy on this, and it was something that meant something to him.
Okay.
So aligning with him, or being with him or alongside him, that kind of analogy of sitting on a couch alongside with an arm around, that's what I did in that situation. And then to go on to say, what I simply meant was, I haven't planned this well enough with the dinner. I actually need larger plates. How would you feel about that? Now, what I saw in him was what we would usually find when we show empathy in a situation where something has changed that is beyond the child or the adolescent's control, and we should show empathy. And that is, he said, okay, mummy, no problem. I'll go and change the plates.
Right.
Thanks for understanding.
So he's had the meltdown.
Yep.
You've then done...
Put myself in his shoes.
In his shoes. And in this example, you've done that first empathy
Absolutely.
example, which is that you haven't felt his emotion, but you were cognitive. Is that right?
Yeah, or I've been compassionate. I would say. I've seen it from his perspective, and then I've tried to make a suggestion of how we could perhaps move forward. And at the same time, I've also tried to explain that I made an error. I've tried to be honest as well and say I misjudged really what I thought was going to happen.
So you've acknowledged the fact that this was an adult's decision in
Yes.
this moment, and the adult changed things, not that he picked out the wrong plates.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And then on the basis of that, he has gone back and changed the plates and been happy to go with that.
Okay.
So I think the main reason why in these situations, as it was with number 2 for us, and it is with other kids or adolescents when empathy should be shown and is shown, what's effective is that it basically takes the heat out of the situation. It stops the child from thinking that you are there sort of posing a threat to them, trying to get them to somehow snap out of their emotional response, but rather that you align with them. You can see it from their perspective, and that allows them to feel, I suppose, reassured, like you've really heard them.
So then I need to make sure that the voice I'm using in delivering what you just said is a reassuring tone, that I have to pause myself when the food is cooking and I don't want to burn it or what have you, is that I take a breath and deliver it in a calm way. Because you could say what you've just said, but deliver it in a very rushed way, or what could be perceived as being insincere, and not actually be interpreted by the child as being empathetic.
Exactly.
Okay.
That's exactly right. So the first thing really is not just giving lip service. It's empathy is really about truly demonstrating to the child that you not only can you see it from their perspective, but you have to prove to a child, kids and adolescents and really adults as well, need to actually, it's like, well, what's your evidence of that? You're telling me that you can see it from my perspective, or, you can see that I'm frustrated, you can see that I'm sad, or you can see that I'm disappointed, but show me how you can see it. That's what empathy really is.
Okay.
It's about the parent truly putting themselves in the child's shoes by showing them exactly how it is that they can see that person is feeling that way. And the way we demonstrate that is by articulating clearly and calmly, as you've just described, to that individual, that we can see these emotions, we can see it in their behaviour. We're guessing that they're probably thinking ... So using the example of the dinner, I said to him, I can see you put a lot of time and effort into this, that it's frustrating that I've just come along and, changed it. This was something that really was important to you. So I've tried to give words to what I'm perceiving in his emotions,
Okay.
rather than just say, look, I can see you're unhappy about it. Why don't we do this instead? Yeah,
Right.
which is a little bit more like giving something a superficial look in.
And a little bit dismissive.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
And I think, imagine if this was your partner, like if you were to come home from work
Yeah.
and you've had a bad day, and I ask you, how's your day? And you sort of, disclose that you've had a terrible meeting or something's gone wrong or whatever. And I say, oh, well, I can see you're frustrated. It'll be fine. Just do this and, it'll sort itself out and give you sort of a list of suggestions. That doesn't sit well for an individual.
Yeah,
as
right.
opposed to...
You haven't heard me.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
As opposed to if I say, yeah, that must have been really hard for you. I can see how, and then really try to put myself in your shoes by articulating what emotions I think you might have been feeling and talking about what I think must have been going through your head at that point in time. I'm reassuring the individual, you in that instance, or our son, or other parents with their own kids. I'm reassuring that I'm putting effort. I care about what your feelings are, and I can prove that care, but I can back it up basically by trying to speak about your feelings and your thoughts at that point in time.
So now because we still want to look at time, so let's look at then what's the appropriate use of discipline. As we said, let's not look at these polarization of these two parenting styles, and let's bring them back together. So let's give examples of where discipline is an appropriate parenting style.
Yeah, so that was empathy, and so discipline would be appropriate where we talk with empathy about when something happens that's beyond the child's control.
Mm-hmm.
Right? For example, a common one is there's a change in circumstances that's beyond their control. So discipline is more appropriate for, where the child really deliberately is testing limits. So, you ask them to pack up their toys and they kind of give you a bit of cheek back, no. Or, maybe a limit is placed on the child and they chuck a toy, or they, give you a bit of sass, or maybe they hit their sibling, or maybe they even hit you, in response to some sort of limit being placed on them. So it is reasonable to use, we might think of negative discipline or negative consequences, like setting limits on behaviours or potentially ignoring, inappropriate language and things like that, so that the child understands that there will still be limits put on them. It's not necessarily appropriate in that situation to, kind of say to a child, well, look, I can see that you, don't really feel like packing your toys up at the moment because it's boring to do it and all that sort of stuff. I mean, you can try that, but I think ultimately parents, feel that response is ultimately ineffectual. That, once you've shown a child that you can see that it's boring to pack up their toys, well then what? Does the child pack up the toys or not? And so that's where discipline comes in. It is reasonable to say, in this house, we pack up our belongings. So I expect you to pack up your toys now, please. So you can use, a firmer voice, or, remind them of the instruction, or, remind them that the consequence is that, whether it's done now or later, the toys are going to get packed up. Those sorts of things are very reasonable to do in that situation. It doesn't require, a lengthy discussion about how the child may be thinking or feeling relating to packing up toys, or not hitting their brother, or, not responding with inappropriate language when you ask them to come to the table or something like that.
Okay.
And then there are times where both are appropriate. And before I get onto that, just in terms of discipline, we talked earlier about not wanting to think of discipline as just a negative response. So, it's appropriate to use discipline in the positive sense, teaching a behaviour through positive practices like praise and affection and rewards, and other positive, responses all the time. Whenever we see the right behaviour from a child, the behaviour that we'd like to see more of, like being cooperative, using, kind language at home, being respectful.
Finishing homework on time.
Yeah, for instance, putting effort into things, all those sorts of behaviours. Then it's very appropriate to use positive consequences. Like, and again, I did a Facebook post, a video post on this some weeks ago now, so people can check that out. But, a range of positive consequences, from affection to praise to even something quite silly like, doing a funny dance that makes it really memorable for the child, that response got such a strong reaction from you, and therefore they're quite likely to do it again. to maybe rewards at times, like tangible rewards. Maybe there's a point system in place where they earn a certain number of points towards a particular
like the old milkshake at
reward
McDonald's or something like that.
Could be that. Absolutely, any of those sorts of things. So that also is discipline in the positive sense of teaching a child or shaping or moulding behaviour.
What about chores around the house?
What about them?
Is that a sense of, like, if you give an example, like with our children,
Yeah.
they have age-appropriate chores.
Uh-huh.
Is that an example of positive discipline, or is that responsibility?
Giving them responsibility is really important. Asking them to do chores to be cooperative is giving them a responsibility, but your response to that, as in the expectation that they do it, and a response when they do it or when they don't do it, is all part of the broader discipline system, if you like.
So, for example, the eldest's response or chore is to make all of the beds. Okay, so when they do it without being prompted, because they know that's what they have to do, what's that? Is that an example of how would you then positively reward that discipline?
Yeah, so you could use a number of different responses. Sometimes it might be praise. Sometimes it might be sometimes it might be affection. Sometimes it might be that they're earning, points towards a particular goal.
Okay,
like a milkshake at McDonald's or a milkshake wherever you want to have your milkshakes, but anywhere. Or it might be that they that you simply go over to them and say, and again, it's kind of level with them and say, when you do this, it makes me feel so happy that you're being so cooperative, and I think that's fantastic. So you can be quite sincere as well and tell them how much your behaviour means to me.
Right. And also when they remember to take their dishes to the table after dinner, something you may have been reminding them, and then when you catch them do it, I know we've done this, is that when you see them put the cup into the sink, you are then positive in saying, well done, thank you for doing that. We've talked about that. So that's, again, positive reinforcement of being disciplined, knowing that that's the expectation.
Yeah, it's using discipline. It's teaching a behaviour or shaping a behaviour by positively reinforcing it, yes.
Okay, and so then
phrasing it up.
An example of, say, where the beds then don't get made over successive days, how is the appropriate way to approach that when the child's not showing the discipline they should be showing in an area that they've been given responsibility for?
So in that situation, you might need to think as a parent about, well, why is this happening? If there's a pattern there, is it that the task itself, do they know how to do the task?
Right.
Are they avoiding it because there's something about the task that's now really mundane? Is there a way of sort of assisting them with making it more interesting, perhaps? Do they need to be, is it that the task is too onerous? Like, has the task been set at a reasonable level for their development? For example, asking, a 5-year-old to make the bed, or make 2 or 3 beds may not be reasonable at all.
Right.
But asking the 9 or 10-year-old, that might be very reasonable. So I think that knowing how to respond depends on thinking through those different scenarios first.
Okay.
And then you can determine what the best response is.
Right, so as a parent, you might make the wrong call. You might set I think a great idea was to make the beds for this child at this age. They suddenly don't do it. It may not necessarily be that they're not interested or something like that. You just may have chosen the wrong chore for the wrong age.
For sure.
Okay, so that's just something.
That can happen often.
Yeah,
and
of
parenting
course.
is that. It's really, I think one of the things the more I know, the more I know I don't know. Parenting sometimes is a bit of trial and error. Children are unpredictable. They're human beings. They're individuals. They, what works one day may not always work the next. And I think parenting well is about being flexible and about being able to reflect and go, okay, what is it in this situation that didn't work? Was it that they just didn't know what to do? If they don't know what to do, then I can easily spend more time teaching them, and then they will know what to do. Okay. Is it that they just, this task is so unappealing to them that it needs to be a different task? They're more prepared to do some other chore, like vacuum the floor, where they can be praised and rewarded for that instead. Is it that the task in and of itself is too difficult and I can make it easier or simpler? So they're all things that can be adjusted when you've got the capacity to reflect and be flexible and not simply see it as, right, well, I asked for this to happen and it hasn't happened, So therefore there's an instant consequence for
Right.
that behaviour.
So you're going to miss dessert tonight. You're not going to earn a
For
point
example.
tonight. You're not going to get the
Yeah.
whatever XYZ reward.
And I
or
think that's where we go wrong with thinking of discipline as only negative. We can become punitive and harsh, and that's not necessarily the right response when someone simply isn't partaking in their chores on a regular basis.
Okay.
So sometimes it is reasonable to give a consequence or set a limit and say, right, if you've gone through all those other things in your mind, like I have shown you what to do, I've set the task at a reasonable level for your stage of your development. It's yes, doing chores generally is a bit boring, but that's okay. We can
Welcome to
toughen up
life.
a little bit. Yeah, that's right. So that's okay. I've ticked all those boxes in my mind. So my expectation is that you do, make your bed, for instance. And if they still are, not doing that or resisting or ultimately being obstinate or oppositional and saying, stuff you, I'm not going to make the bed.
Yep.
Then it's okay to set limits and say, well, in this house we do our chores. And so, it's unreasonable that you're behaving like this and there is a consequence for that. Like, maybe there is something that is a privilege that might be removed, or maybe some people use ignoring bad behaviour until the child sees themselves and then they come round. Some people use time out. It really depends on the situation of the family, and I think that's the thing. There's not always a sort of 1, 2, 3 approach that works. That in general you can follow a recipe style approach,
Sure.
but I think you need to think through the situation first, and that's where time is really important.
Right. So then, great segue.
Yes.
So let's spend the last next few
a little
minutes.
bit of time talking about time.
Yes.
And I think that's certainly, from a clinical perspective and as a parent, what is becoming clearer and clearer to me as I get older and wiser is, hopefully, is that unless I have adequate time
Right.
for the children, then I can't make sensible decisions as to whether to be empathetic, whether to use various forms of discipline, either positive or negative, what limits to set, why I'm setting limits at all, what's causing certain behaviours, what the root cause might be, is there a pattern, all those sorts of things. I need time to be able to appropriately assess the situation and work out what the response should be. And then I need to be flexible. There isn't, only one style of parenting that is the right way to go. There are, like any, good approach, it might borrow bits and pieces from lots of different styles. An eclectic style is a good style. A flexible individual, I think, is an effective parent. Someone who can look at the situation with the child and approach that in a level-headed way based on the time of judging it sensibly.
Right. So there's more than one key on a piano.
Correct.
In the same way that there is more than one parenting style.
Yeah.
And so you've got a choice there.
I think one thing that is important to say, though, about discipline, while I remember it, is the importance of keeping it as neutral and boring as possible. So not having...
Which is hard when you don't have time.
That's exactly
You can be
right.
faster to anger when you're under when you're under a deadline,
Yes.
which could be something is important right in the moment, which is maybe getting a child to bed or getting something done so that dinner can be put on the table at a reasonable time. But when we're working towards deadlines like that and a time pressure, we are faster to anger, right? So how can you catch yourself in that moment and create the time to then pause to then not go to anger and then create a bigger problem?
Look, I think that's a hard one in the world we live in, where parents are under lots of other pressures, and that's what starves their time, even their mental time. Like I can be with my children, but not really with them if I'm mentally somewhere else, still at work, still thinking about other tasks that I've got to get done
That night.
once they're in bed.
Yep.
So I'm sort of counting down the hours.
Dishwasher's got to get packed, washing's got to go out, bag's got to get sorted, I've got to do my own work, I've got to make a phone call, blah, blah, blah.
Exactly. So I think really, one obvious answer is just trying to streamline our allocation of time more, so that when we're with children, we're really with children. We're not spending that time thinking about other things as much as possible. We're giving them undivided attention. If that's for, getting the table set, preparing meals, completing homework routines, whatever the shower, bedtime routine is, all that sort of stuff, that we set aside, or we, I suppose, sacrifice our other activities that we want to get to give them that full and undivided attention, so that then we can be effective in those moments and have even split-second decisions made in the time that's allowed for us then, but at least from a more level-headed perspective. We can be more flexible then as well, and we have the capacity to be more effective and more empathetic where we need to be. But if we are trying to multitask as parents and manage the children at the same time as we're on a work call, at the same time as we're checking our emails, at the same time as we're even not doing those things but still reading in our minds back at the office or on to tomorrow, then nothing that happens in that situation with our kids is really going to work truly well.
Okay.
So it is about trying to see parenting as a one task at a time, as in focus on kids first and then put other things aside and then come back to them later, where you can give those things your undivided attention as well. And it's hard to do. Making that decision to sort of set aside your own stuff, basically, and give your attention to your kids when they really need it is a really difficult decision to make, because there are so many competing, demands on us these days. But ultimately, we can be more effective in both worlds, whether it's work and child rearing, if we do one thing well at a time. And we're not built for multitasking, really. We're actually built to focus on one task at a time. I think this idea of multitasking has really put us under unnecessary pressure.
Okay, maybe we can talk about that as another, because
Another
I'm sure there's people that are thinking, oh no, we can all multitask.
No.
So, okay, brilliant. So just to recap, we don't have to think of empathy and discipline as being polar opposites. That don't get sucked into that world, because there's actually a great way to parent by using empathy at the right time and discipline at the right time. And to be able to discern that is to actually create the time. And by creating time is that you are focused as a parent, that when the children are now home from school and they are present with you, that you have to be present with them, and that you do your best to, so there may be things that you do, like you literally put your phone somewhere where you can't rush to get to it, the TV's off, the radio's off, you are just observing as you go about your tasks, making dinner, getting things organised, observing the children doing homework, doing chores or whatever that is. But the key thing is that you've not, apart from the other things you've got to get done, you don't have those additional distractions. And as you said as well, not just necessarily what a present, like a phone, is available to you. It's also that if you're catching yourself thinking about the meeting tomorrow, or the fact that, it's not dropping them to the bus line, it's actually taking them to school, because then after that you've got to get on to, the optometrist for that piece, or go take the car in for a service, that you say to yourself, right, well, once they're asleep, the adult tasks can then be focused on. And this time, if I catch myself drifting off in that area, I have to be disciplined to say, no, the focus right now is on the children. Is that a good recap of how
absolutely.
we look at it?
I think that's a great recap. The take-home messages are discipline and empathy can go together.
Right.
Discipline means more than negative discipline. It means positive responses as well, and they're really important. Discipline is really just teaching kids. Empathy, and we've talked about how to deliver empathy. It's more than just giving lip service. It's actually putting yourself really in another person's shoes and proving to them through your language that you can see how they're feeling, and you can see through how they may be thinking.
Okay.
So they go together, and they can work well together. And then there's also times for using both. That, too much negative discipline is not a great thing, and too much empathy maybe not a great thing as well.
Okay.
And when we want to discipline in terms of consequences and limit setting, we want to be boring and neutral so that we're not giving too much attention to the situation. And then, yes, we need to make decisions as parents to be truthful to ourselves and be honest with ourselves about really how effective are we being if we're not allowing adequate time to parenting. And the only way to really do that well and to be good, flexible parents that can use an eclectic approach is to have, an approach where we're focusing on one thing at a time.
Right, clearing that space. Okay, wonderful, excellent. Well, thank you very much for a wonderful discussion on empathy and discipline. Okay.
I feel that was good for me.
You
too.
feel like it was...
I'm feeling like that it was cathartic, yes.
Good.
And tomorrow I'll be a better parent.
The weight is off the shoulders.
That's right. I've sort of sorted out a few things in my own head as we've gone through.
All right, excellent.
But before we go,
Okay.
a joke.
As
I
always.
like to end with a joke.
Yes.
Well, my clients always ask me to end with a joke. Okay, so this is one from my son's joke book.
Okay.
So, why do pandas like old movies?
I do not know. Why do pandas like old movies?
Because they are black and white.
Aha, of course. Well, that's a wrap for this episode of the Annie Centre podcast. I'm Justin Kingdon.
And I'm Dr. Anne Chalfont. And you can visit the Facebook page, which is at Dr. Anne Chalfont, and leave me a comment or give me some idea about what you'd like to hear in any of our podcasts.
Our mission is helping families thrive, and we hope this podcast has done just that for you. You will find Anne on Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter. Search the hashtags Dr. Anne Chalfont or Annie Centre. Also, please leave a rating and review on the podcast app where you found us, and tell your friends and family to do the same.
Please.
And please subscribe to the podcast and leave comments. We really want to hear all of those, and we will speak again soon.
The Annie Centre podcast was brought to you by Annie Centre Proprietary Limited. Please visit anniecentre.com and subscribe to receive the latest updates and digital downloads from Dr. Anne Chalfont.